Today on CityCast Denver. The Denver public school system is dominating the local news cycle. Students protesting at the Capitol led to a questionable use of force against the young demonstrators, and DPS itself is under the microscope for its alleged lax approach to expulsions. Not to mention the district's own board is very publicly bickering again. Producer Aaron O'Toole joins me to dig into the state of DPS, plus we discuss a very interesting turn in our pizza landscape. Today is Tuesday, April 11th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Hello, Aaron.
Good morning, Bree.
So clearly Paul still on vacation, but
he's still out.
He's still out, but that doesn't stop the news. And the reason I bring up Paul Caroli, our producer, not because I want to call him out on being on a vacation I want to be on, but because we got to start this roundup of stories with the most Paul story of all time.
What could that be?
Any guesses what that's related to, Aaron?
My first guess would be, is it pizza?
Oh my gosh, it's pizza. And not only is it pizza, it's one of Paul's greatest conundrums in life, the thing that really drives him to dig and find out more and more about this particular pizza place. You know, longtime listeners will know we're talking about Bojo's Pizza.
Yes. What's going on with Bojo's? Why is it even in the news? I mean,
That's like a totally fair question. So Bojo's actually turned 50 over the weekend, which is super cool.
Oh.
But their ever elusive owner, Chip Bear, was on hand in person for the big announcement, which was not just that they were turning 50.
Right.
Colorado Sun reporter and guest of the show, Jason Blevins, reported that Chip's, started this big festivities outside the restaurant to say, happy 50th anniversary to this restaurant. I'm selling it.
Whoa.
Yeah. So just keep in mind, this is like one of the largest private employers in Clear Creek County. I mean, this place means business. It's not just a pizza restaurant that has different locations around the state. Like, it's an institution. And then Chip's little joke was, I'm selling the company to his employees. So it's becoming a worker-owned restaurant.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. I imagine people were going, why did you invite us to these festivities to say you're selling the company?
So it's great. I think it's on along those lines of we're talking about this growth in conversations around worker power. And I mean, I would also feel a little bit skeptical because the restaurant business is a really precarious place to be post-quarantine, still in the midst of COVID issues. But
sure.
I mean, for longtime employees, that seems like it could be a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah. Is this kind of a rare thing to have an employee-owned company?
An employee-owned restaurant. Yeah, I think there's a little over 200 employee-owned private companies in Colorado, but it is very rare for those to be restaurants. So, Bojo's could be precedent setting, which is pretty cool.
You never know. I'm sad they waited until Paul was on vacation to turn 50. How dare they?
I know. I was like, I am waiting for Paul's reaction. Well, so that was our fun news. But we want to dig into several stories that are interrelated here that are happening here in Denver and across the country. But Denver in particular is grappling with something, which is these big conversations we're having across the city about Denver public schools in general. But Denver public schools has really been in the spotlight in part because of two recent shootings at East High School in the last couple of months. One resulted in the death of a teenager named Luis Garcia. And then the other one involved a student who shot two administrators who lived. Unfortunately, the student died by suicide. But this, along with this ongoing conversation that is unfortunately relevant almost weekly here in America, is the conversation about gun violence and how it impacts young people.
Yes. And there have been a lot of student protests that we've been seeing.
Yeah, and there was one last week where students from various DPS schools walked out in this continued protest over gun violence issues. And they walked to the Capitol, went into the House gallery, into the balcony where you can observe like legislating happening. And there were students that were shouting about legislators not doing anything or the lack of inaction by adults to keep kids safe and alive. And then I guess there was an attempt by State Patrol, who was like the armed guards that were there,
Right.
to remove one of the shouting students, and they had to get over other students in the row to reach this person. But there was video that circulated through social media from various viewpoints of a young Latino student who excessive force was being used to remove him, and he wasn't even the one that was yelling. And so the Denver Post covered this really well. They talked to students that were there, and students that were there said it felt like profiling. And House Speaker Julie McCluskey, who's a Democrat from Dillon, is calling for an investigation into this particular incident. So I think we'll know more after that. But I think it just reiterates the gravity of the situation. Is in so many ways, it's about gun violence. It's about the role of police in society. It's the role of police in schools. It's how we interact with children, how children interact with this world that we live in with gun violence, and how they use their own power, but then also the racial lines that are drawn when we talk about enforcement.
Right. I'm wondering too, because the Post also did this deep dive into expulsion rates in DPS. What is the relationship here?
Yeah. And so what I think, again, I think pulling back and looking at this as a bigger picture conversation, it's really about gun violence and the role of schools, the role that schools play in these situations. Because if you're under 18, school is the majority of the place that you spend the most time other than home, right?
Yeah.
So schools are really in charge of a lot of things socially in our society that I think can get pretty murky when we talk about enforcement of things like expulsions. So the Denver Post did this really great, nuanced, deep dive into the expulsion rates in DPS, kind of looking at how are students punished, or how are things taken care of when a situation in particular, like a student bringing a gun to school, like what happens? And over the last decade, the Post found in looking at reports that DPS has been trending downward for expulsion. So they're expelling less students over the last decade than they have. And DPS is obviously the largest school district in the state, but they also had the least amount of students expelled.
It seems like there would be a little bit of a tension here, a tension between, are we being too lenient with these policies, or are we helping students ultimately who don't need to be kicked out? They need this place to go and to grow.
That's exactly the tension that I think the Post article was getting at. The lower expulsion rate sort of comes as DPS is also reporting more real and fake guns being found on students. Mm-hmm. And this bigger picture of gun violence in the city. So like citywide, 17 teenagers were killed in Denver last year. And that's almost double the number that had died 5 years ago.
Awful.
That's, yeah, I just don't even know I don't even know how to think about that. But then we put the element of school into that relationship. And so the idea is with lower expulsion rates, we're keeping kids in the classroom, even if they have behavioral issues. They're trying to figure out what to do other than just sending them away. But DPS policy clearly states a student who brings a gun to campus is supposed to be suspended immediately, followed by a hearing through a third party. But sort of what happens in that hearing is really murky, and DPS declined to comment on that particular hearing process. But as far as it seems, they aren't expelling students for having guns. I think the example that we have right here, unfortunately, is this student who shot two administrators in March had been expelled from Cherry Creek schools for a previous issue, and he was on a sort of behavior safety plan, and that's the reason he was being patted down when the shooting occurred. But there were questions of like, okay, why was he in our school, right, if he got expelled from another school? Right,
and why this involved security procedure. Are we asking school districts and school administrators to just do too much?
Exactly. And so there's this really fine line too, where there was this quote from a teacher, Aaron Lowenkron, that the Post talked to, and he said, "I'm a math teacher. I don't want to be in law enforcement. I want to teach math and invite as many kids as possible into that process." And I just felt that comment was such a great encapsulation of the struggle that teachers are having, which is like, I want my students to be safe. I don't want to be in charge of figuring out if they have weapons and why we even got to this point, right?
Yeah.
And I have to say, anecdotally, the teachers that I've talked to aren't necessarily like, please, yes, we want more law enforcement in schools. We want stricter expulsion outcomes and things like that. But I think the question is, okay, if that's not the answer. How do we keep ourselves safe as teachers? And also, how do we not become law enforcement and find ways to like help our kids, but also get more support? I think that's the hard part for teachers here.
Yeah, I think because the bottom line is you're still going to have students in the classroom who are struggling with behavioral issues or problems concentrating. Having more police in schools can be a great thing for safety, but what about kids who are just struggling to behave well and pay attention? Are they going to be put into the school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, and I think that would be the other thing too, is like safe for who, right? DPS has about 90,000 students enrolled, and about 75% of them are students of color. And the district itself has a history of disciplining Black and Latino students at higher rates than white peers. And this is information that DPS has shared. They're aware. This is something that they're working on. But at the same time, it's like not pushing kids out of school, right? Because that was my first reaction, was like, why would we expel a kid for a year for having a gun? We got to figure out why they had a gun, what's going on in their lives that they felt like they needed one, where they got one. And that's like, those are really hard questions for a school district to ask when it's clearly a societal issue. It's a community issue. It's an everybody issue. So I really feel for folks on both sides of this issue, whether you're someone who's pro more police in schools and someone who is like, that's not the answer. I see the struggle between both of those things. What's in the school board conversation these days, Erin?
I mean, there are a couple of things, but I want to start with Kwame Spearman. You may remember Kwame Spearman from the Denver mayoral race. He actually ended his run for mayor in mid-March without saying too much about why he was doing that. But he says now he is considering running for a seat on the DPS school board. He is apparently not done with Denver politics. There's a great story from Westward by Teague Bolin. Kwame said he is not going to be returning to his position as CEO at the Tattered Cover, and he's considering running for this at-large seat on the DPS board. That is the seat that's currently held by Aonte Anderson.
Okay. I know. And I kind of guffawed a little bit when you said he was running for school board. I think, again, we don't need to talk about that mess that was the mayor's race. But to point out, he's the only candidate that dropped out of the race after ballots went out.
Right.
So that would, to me, would signal a lack of support by the community for your run to be in a position of leadership in the city. So the announcement of being interested in a board seat for something as influential as the DPS board is confounding to me.
I'm not really sure where it's coming from either. In this article, Spearman said he really enjoyed running for mayor, so much that he dropped out, I guess. No, he said he likes the policy conversations. He likes meeting with constituents. And I think he thinks he can make a difference here. I mean, famously, the DPS board has just been in turmoil for the last year.
Yeah, it's been in turmoil in terms of it's fighting within itself.
Yeah.
It seems like a wild thing to want to jump into after you just left a 17 candidate mayor's race.
Right. You know, I did read that he is a graduate of East High School, which I had not realized. And I'm wondering if what's been happening there has factored into his decision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think not only is Kwame a graduate of East High School, he was running Tattered Cover directly across the street from East High School. So I would be interested in his perspective. I also know that he hasn't been back in Denver for a long time. He was out of the state working and, had a career elsewhere. So I don't know. This just seems like trying to do a lot of big things while just reintroducing yourself to your home city.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But Bree, this is not the only DPS news that's going on right now.
No, especially not related to the school board, because again, if we know anything about this iteration of the school board, it is in the news a lot in this. So what is going on with the school board, the current sitting school board? What's going on right now?
Well, this has to do with Board Vice President Aonte Anderson. There is news that he may face another censure. Denver's school board president, Soshi Gaitan, says she's going to move to censure Anderson. She is alleging that he violated board policy, and this was following the March shooting of 2 administrators at East High. According to reporting by Chalkbeat's Melanie Asmar, Gaitan is accusing him of disclosing confidential information to the press. I think I saw him tweeting about this too. This information came from a closed-door executive session of the board, so that's private, it's confidential. Anderson says that he only disclosed information that was shared outside of that session.
That's going to be hard to prove.
It's going to be really hard to prove.
And I think we've got to talk about the fact that this is not the first time that Vice President Anderson has been censured by his own board.
That's right. 2021, VP Anderson was censured for violating expectations of board member behavior. There was an investigation that found he'd engaged in some kind of, quote, flirtatious conduct with students on social media. You know, he denied doing anything improper, but he was censured then. We'll see if this happens again. The board was set to discuss this, on Monday, and then they'll vote on April 20th. But like we mentioned before, Bree, this is coming after a year of division and turmoil within the DPS board. And in fact, we talked with Melanie Asmar about it last year. She's the reporter for Chalkbeat who's been doing some great reporting on this.
Yeah, she really helped us dig into understanding, so we had this new board elected, and a lot of, I think most of them were from this same sort of slate. They were supported by the teachers union. They were supposed to be more progressive.
Right.
I think the assumption, for me as a voter, was that they were under similar ideologies and how they were going to operate the school board. And really in this moment that we've been in around things like violence in schools and how we support students. And beyond those serious issues, this board is having some interpersonal conflicts, right?
I will say that, it appears to be partly a result of this new style of operating that the board came in with and said, we're going to do, we're going to operate with one voice. It's called policy governance. Again, it was supposed to unify the board in making these decisions, but really it sparked these interpersonal conflicts that you mentioned, some downright cringy board meetings. I was
like, you don't want to listen to that tape. Makes you uncomfortable for people.
It was tough. But part of the other problem was they just seemed to have this inability to actually get things done, to actually craft policies that would help students. And like you just mentioned, Bree, this is a time when we really need action on behalf of the students to keep them safe. And I don't know if that's possible with this board.
Yeah, I would be extremely frustrated if I was a student, understanding that I might be out protesting the fact that adults in the room can't make decisions to keep us safe from gun violence, but they're in the news for fighting with each other all the time. Yeah. I don't know. Okay, before we go, we being the show that brings you all the latest Casa Bonita news. So the Post has been doing this really fun series on talking to big fans of Casa Bonita and former employees, folks that work there all throughout the almost 50 years that it's been open. And the most recent story involves the food. And they talked to Tiny Ricciardi, the reporter at Denver Post, talked to a couple former employees and some big fans of Casa Bonita who said, you know what? This sort of complaint about the food at Casa Bonita being bad is unwarranted to them. Erin, did you go to Casa Bonita when it was open?
So I have to tell you, I've never been to Casa Bonita.
Okay.
My husband he went many times as a child, and for the record, he says the food wasn't that bad, but he was also 9, and anything tastes good, especially in an atmosphere like that.
I'm with Jonathan on that, and I'm also with a lot of these folks that were interviewed for this story, because the drum I'm going to bang on one last time before we get a new 2.0 Casa Bonita is when it was open, it was a place for children. I have been there dozens of times, many, many birthdays of my own, my friends, my cousins. I will tell you, I don't have a distinct memory of the food at all being gross or anything.
Okay.
As an adult, I understood it wasn't great. I didn't think it was terrible, but I just wanted to share this amazing quote from a former employee who worked there in 1975. Becky Nazaro of Parker told the Post, most people that worked there loved the food. The longer we worked there, the more of a discount we got on our food. And they enjoyed it.
They legitimately liked it. Part of me has to wonder if, as cuisine developed and elevated in Denver, if maybe people just started thinking less fondly on the food at Casa Bonita, like compared to what else you could get in Denver. Suddenly it sucked.
No, that's true. That's true. I think that's at play here. Also, I think there was some information in this article that was really interesting that someone actually worked in the kitchen in the early 70s or in the mid 70s said everything was made from scratch except the tamales. So I would say the food I was probably eating in 2015 at Casa Bonita was not made from scratch. So I think there have been some very different versions. But what I loved about the story, too, is these folks are excited no matter what the Casa Bonita is going to reopen. But one of the gentlemen said that he was really excited that Dana Loca Rodriguez, who's the head chef now of Casa Bonita, she's a celebrated, decorated chef here in Denver. She's, again, in our interview with her, promised to bring back those original recipes, but just with fresher, better ingredients.
Oh.
So,
And back to making everything from scratch, maybe.
Yeah.
I was seeing a band, Grizzly Bear, at the Ogden. This was before the pandemic and before Casa Bonita closed, obviously. And they mentioned on stage, hey, we went to Casa Bonita earlier.
Oh my God.
The crowd cheered and they're like, and none of us got food poisoning. And the crowd cheered even louder.
See? It's true. If Grizzly Bear says it, it's true.
It's true.
Okay, one more Casa Bonita note that you have for us. We got a little bit more news.
Yeah, a little bit more news, and it's kind of combining physical fitness with Casa Bonita. I read that they are partnering with the Denver Colfax Marathon.
Cool.
Which is so cool. I loved seeing this 9 News story about it. Apparently, when you run in the Denver Colfax Marathon, you run by all of these iconic landmarks like the state capitol, the Denver Zoo, and Casa Bonita.
Wow.
But I think this
run.
That I know. I can't even fathom doing it. So this year, Casa Bonita is jumping in. They're sponsoring the race's volunteers. So apparently what that means is you're going to look at, there's 1,500 volunteers for this race. You're going to see an ocean of Pepto-Bismol pink shirts. All of the volunteers.
I love that. I have to say, they've just been really smart about their branding. They're aligning with things they know people connect to Casa Bonita. And that's awesome.
I didn't see anything about whether they're going to hand out free sopapillas to all participants, but I think that would be great. Personally. By the way, if you want to participate in any way in the Colfax Marathon, it's happening the weekend of May 20th and 21st. It apparently is Denver's only marathon. It's the largest running event in Denver. Like 20,000 people are expected to participate.
Yeah, so you can sign up to participate or to volunteer by going to runcolfax.org. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'm also thinking about our dear lead producer, Paul, avid runner on our team.
Okay.
We might have to see if he and his wife, Megan, are up to the challenge of doing the Colfax Marathon. I would love to see it. Love to see it. Well, Erin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Oh, and just a reminder, me, your faithful host, will be getting on stage Thursday night and reading from my teenage diaries. Join us for Mortified Live at the Oriental Theater, where you can meet me and the rest of the CityCast Denver crew in person for this silly celebration of high school cringe. Get your tickets now at getmortified.com/live. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell former Bojo's owner Chip Bear about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Denver, by texting Denver to 66866. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. Paul probably has like a Google alert on Bojo's and he's like on his vacation, like, no. I don't get to report on the Bojo's transfer of power.